Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Grow New York Food and Ag Innovation Chats webinar series. I'm Brian Bauer. I'm the competitions director at the Center for Regional Economic Advancement at Cornell. And I'm really excited to step in this week as the host for this webinar. Jen Smith is usually the host, and she allowed me to step in to her lofty shoes to fill in, and I'm glad to be here. So, as I mentioned, Cornell University and the Center for Regional Economic Advancement sponsor the series, and we're really thrilled this week to bring our partners in Grow New York from NextCore to come and introduce our subject speaker. A couple things to know before we do that. What about Grow New York? Grow New York is a $1 million top prize food and ag innovation competition. It's open now for applications, so it's a free application. And if you know startups or you are a startup that is interested, really encourage people to go to www.grow-ny.com and check it out. We run information webinars every other week, and the application itself is open through 5 p.m. July 15th. It's for startups that are innovating in food and ag, and it's about building a food and ag innovation ecosystem here in the Grow New York region, which spans 22 counties, from Rochester to Syracuse down here to the southern tier. So please go to Grow New York, grow-ny.com to learn more about that. So today, for our lunchtime series, we will be having an interview. That interview is going to take just under 30 minutes, and there's a question and answer function for you to type questions in, and please do. I will be monitoring the Q&A and gathering questions, which we'll save towards the end of the interview, and look forward to some great questions from the audience. So use the Q&A function, not the chat function. If it's out there, you should go to the Q&A function. We will have more in this speaker series, including 2 coming up: when to bring on sales support from Emmy's Organics, and balancing sustainability and viability with Propagate Ventures. These 2 will be coming up in the coming weeks, so be looking for those. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Jim Sinal. Jim is the executive director of NextCore. They're our major partner in Grow New York up in Rochester, and also run a wide variety of great programs that I'm personally a huge fan of. And I'd like to hand over to Jim to introduce the speakers for this week. And I'm going to leave this slide up for you, Jim, while you do that, and then I'll probably stop slides in a minute. So I'm going to stop my camera and let you go.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian. As you said, we've been a longtime partner of Cornell and Rev, and more recently with Grow New York, and we're thrilled to be working with you guys on a number of fronts. NextCore, for those participating today, we are the Innovation Hotspot designee for the Rochester and Finger Lakes region, and that's one of the 3 regions of the Grow New York territory. We operate the Innovation Hotspot with RIT Venture Creations. But NextCore is a venture development organization. We have a number of programs and services to support startup companies. We have a tech incubator with about 60 different startups in it. We have a couple of clean tech programs and a clean tech accelerator that we're running, funded by NYSERDA. And probably our largest startup program is the Luminate Accelerator Program, which is a $5 million a year program and really recruits optics, photonics, and imaging companies from around the world. And the company that you'll be hearing from today is Noratech, and they're a participant in that program, which is usually a 6-month in-house accelerator program, although it's not really in-house today. So Keenan from Nordetech is joining us from Denmark, his home. And so it kind of shows you how we've all gotten used to working remotely, no matter where we are in the globe. So that's a little bit about NextCore, but I won't bore you all with any more information. My duty is really just to turn it over to Shang, PhD student at Cornell, that's going to be handling the interview, and to Keenan. So with that, I will hand it to you guys.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. So just kind of take over the conversation now. I'll really reintroduce Keenan, the founder and CEO of Noratech. Thank you for taking the time. He's actually, turning away some offers to go out and have some beers to come and talk to us today. Very thankful for that. So Keenan, so what exactly do you do? What is Noratech?
Thanks, Shiang, and thanks, Jim. At Noratech, what we do is we make disposable sensors for agriculture and the environment. A loose way of thinking about it is the finger prick blood test. For diabetes patients, we do the analog for nitrates, phosphates, potassium, and other chemicals relevant to agriculture.
Gotcha. Very cool. So how did it all start?
That's an interesting story. It actually started similar to some Silicon Valley stories you hear. It started in a basement community biolab here in Copenhagen, where I was experimenting with new methods of detection, mainly on the hardware side of things, hardware and software. And my co-founder at the time was working at a research institute in India, and she came to me with the problem of having a sort of a redundant system that they were working on at the time, and problems need solutions. And so that's how we quickly looked into how what I was doing in Copenhagen and the ideas that she had in India could sort of combine. And we were longtime friends at the time, so it was pretty easy to get things going. But it's been quite an adventure since then.
Gotcha. I have high standards for something you call a Silicon Valley startup. I'm originally from the Bay Area, so you better have been wearing like a hoodie, not showered for a couple of days, eating top ramen. Like I expect all those things.
I'd say we checked off those boxes.
Cool. So what inspired you to drop everything you're doing to pursue this?
Wow, yeah, I'm thinking back to that time. It feels like a long time ago, but I think there were two things. There was the technical angle where we really saw a gap in the market because there wasn't a system out at the time. The gold standard is a lab test that takes at minimum a week to get you results. So that's sort of the technical aspect of things. We knew we could do something better. And then there was also the human side of things, where I'm originally from India. And in India, we have a lot of farmers that commit suicide. And it's actually, I'm not going to steal this, my co-founder's sort of dream to be able to do a cheap enough test, or a test that could help alleviate these farmers from by giving them data that they could use to make better decisions and lower their operational cost. So there's sort of two sides to why this began. But I think for me personally, it was the technical conquest of being able to bring something new that didn't exist before. There was that, but it is a very strong human side to it as well.
For sure, that makes a lot of sense. I think on a personal note as well, I completely relate to that. I actually did a lot of research of my own company back in the day, where I was looking at really soil testing and understanding that for farmers in India and Africa, and it's a huge problem. This cost in order to do these certain tests that are very necessary for their everyday lives. So that's cool that you're kind of going about this mission, which I'm with you. I'm with you for that.
Thank you.
So about this tech though, it sounds like some really cool technology. Can you just give the audience here maybe a couple sentences about what exactly makes it tick and why it's so special that only you guys can do it?
Yeah. So it kind of brings together a lot of different technology stacks, you could say. So we start on the base level with a bit of conventional chemistry, with a bit of nanotechnology, or polymer sensing based films. And then we go all the way from there through to microfluidics, computer vision, building hardware, and making all of this tick together. But we do have some core IP on how we make these assays or tests work with a microfluidic chip. Conventional chemistry is really hard. You have things that operate across the bar. Some really work with an acidic environment, some with a very basic environment. Making all of these things work simultaneously was really hard. And this is why it sort of never was commonplace in the industry. And that's why people depended on the labs to do it. You'd have a technician who'd process these samples separately. You'd be able to do separate tests, but there was never a one test that fits all of the different chemicals you need to analyze. And soil, as you may know, is quite a diverse. They say soil is a living organism because it has so many minerals, so many other chemicals, biologicals, and whatnot. And being able to sort of do these tests in parallel is really what kind of helped us. It wasn't the type of research where you have some research and you're looking to commercialize it. It was, there's a problem, this is where we are with the industry today, how can we take a step ahead? So it was always this slight design thinking approach of the iterative process and working a lot with customer assumptions, customer insights to figure out how we should go forward with this.
Got it. Just a better understanding for everyone that maybe has less expertise in the area, can you kind of take us through the customer journey then when they use maybe one of your products as compared to right now the norm?
Yeah, sure. So standard farmer, or more likely an agronomist or a consultant, is called to a farm and they're asked, well, something's wrong, something's happening here and we can't explain it. And most likely what they'll do is, it's kind of like a doctor in a way, you go to them with a problem, except here they come to you. They do a brief inspection on the farm. They try and figure out, there's some factors that they can gauge based on simple vision and figuring out those visible factors. But most likely they'd say, get a soil test. That's one occasion. The other occasion is pre-season. You'd get a lot of soil testing done to figure out how much fertilizer you'd use. So your agronomist or consultant's on your farm, he's taking these soil samples, he's putting them in bags. And traditionally, how it's done today is that you'd send those sample bags to a laboratory. They do their testing, they usually have a backlog of this. They do their testing and then they give you the results typically in a week, if you're lucky, otherwise 2 weeks. And then the agronomist would apply those results. He'd make either a fertilizer plan as an advice or recommendation on how you should go about your season, or he'd use that as a sort of debugging information to figure out why it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. But all of that has a 2-week lag time, and that's where we come in. We work with agronomists and consultants, so we're not trying to replace them. What we do is that we provide them with this product that allows them to make the tests on the spot. So they still go about collecting the samples as they would. If they have just a couple of samples, they can pull out the product and test it right there in the field. If they have, sometimes they take 100 samples, then you wouldn't necessarily do it in the field. You could do it at the truck where you've parked, or you could take it back to the barn of the farmer and do it there. If you have a lot more and you need more hands on deck to get that done, you'd probably do it back at your office, but you'd still get a turnaround time that's not heard of presently.
What is that turnaround time? Just curious.
Well, it really depends. I mean, we know that some of the lab services in the US offer a very quick turnaround time. I've seen some ads that say as fast as 5 working days. We've seen that here in Denmark as well. But they usually work if you have a relationship with the lab. If you're we've tried sending soil samples, for our own internal validation to a lab here without a partnership, and that took us about 2 weeks. And it was fairly expensive. It cost us about 30 USD because we send only 45 samples. So at 45 samples, still costs us about 30 USD per sample.
Got it. So to clarify here, so it's actually your end customer is consultants, the agronomist is going to the field, and actually your product goes to both them and the lab. Because agronomists, if they have maybe a large quantity, they'll still send the samples to the lab for the more extensive testing.
It depends. I mean, if you've taken 1,000 samples, maybe there's a threshold at which it makes more sense to use the lab. But ideally, what we're building is meant to give you all the answers you need from the lab. And so you wouldn't, in theory, you wouldn't have to send it in. Now, if you're doing 1,000 samples, you could look at it 2 ways. Either you send that to a lab and get them to do it, or you just have another one of these devices and you have 2 non-technical staff doing it. One of the crazy ideas we've had is that if you're, when you're young, you typically go out and mow lawns to earn some extra cash because it's a simple enough task for someone who's young to pick it up. It doesn't need that technical competency, and you get up to speed quite fast. that's also one of the ways we've seen this working, is that if there's an enterprising young man or woman that's in a family agricultural business, they could potentially take this up as a new revenue stream and offer these tests to their neighbors. So there's different ways you could see this evolving, but we target typically the consultants because they're the ones who have the need to get answers quickly so they can implement and make better decisions for their clients.
Right, right. I like that analogy. That's a really really good one. So I love this. This is great technology. Very similar, actually, to some of the things I looked at with my own research in my company previously. So this is such an interesting conversation. We can definitely go on and on about this. But for mainly the audience, I'd say, so what differentiates you from competitors? There's so many ag tech companies spawning day in and day out because we all know that it's a hot area, technology and agriculture. So what do you think makes you guys so special?
So I think that, even though the company and the product didn't start out at university, I think the years of work that we put in during our studies and our research sort of fuels this. One of the things that we saw was that irrespective of where you are and how innovative you are, there's a trust factor in the equation. So I've spoken to people that said, yeah, the lab, we just assume that they're correct. And so one of the things that really sets us apart from our competitors, there's about 4 or 5 companies looking specifically at this space, and they all solve it through completely different technology stacks or basic tech. What differentiates us is that we are a chemical analysis. So it's very similar to what they would do in the laboratory. We've taken the reagents, the chemical reactions that will be done in the lab, and shrunken them down to work at a micro scale. And so that's what allows us to also do it in parallel. So in theory, what the technician would be doing on a large scale instrument in the lab, the chemistry he'd be using and the processes he'd be following, we have mimicked that as closely as we can with a scaled down device that can be sold in a standardized way. And so the chemical analysis, a nice way to explain that is we are an absolute method of testing, not a relative method. So there's some methods, you may have heard of the satellite imaging companies that try and give you a recommendation based on how green your crop is. You've probably seen some scanners that try and get the infrared radiation out of it, out of the soil or out of leaves and so on. And what they're basically doing is they're doing a relative measurement, because what they do is they have their method of analysis, let's take near infrared, and then what they do is that they compare that to a soil sample that's been pre-validated, and they make a reference model. And then they apply this model to foreign samples or unknown samples. Where we differentiate from them is that we're not trying to build, we are the ground truth, no pun intended, right? So what we do is that we basically offer that ground truthing, and so it could be valuable for any company that's building a reference model on top of it. So in that sense, it's slightly different from everyone else. And the key advantage is that we do not have to calibrate the world over. That means we can build a calibration model here and test it in the US. We don't have to do a rigorous recalibration.
That makes a lot of sense. So then how accurate is your test in comparison to the current gold standard of like the 2-week test?
So that's something that's an ongoing experiment. What we've seen is where we are right now is we're at a confidence interval of 95%. We have about an 87% accuracy.
Gotcha.
So that's where we are. But it's, again, as I said, it's a function of the calibration. So more calibrations equals slightly better accuracy.
It sounds very promising. So how about the cost then? Sounds like a lot of other companies have different methods of inferring about soil and health of the farm, which sounds like it could be a lot cheaper actually than maybe your method, which is going in and actually taking samples still. Can you talk about the cost of your program or your technology versus others?
Sure. So we position ourselves against the lab test. So what we're trying to do is sort of benchmark against them. So where we are in terms of pricing right now is a bit difficult to say, primarily because I spent a lot of time in Shenzhen learning manufacturing in China, and right now it's a bit difficult. So where we stand in terms of pricing is roughly around, I'd say, between 3,500, 2,500 to 3,500 euros, and a per test cost of about €8 per test. But don't hold me to this, because things are changing. We are seeing slightly high. We might have to manufacture in Germany, which is going to raise those hardware costs at least. The interesting thing, though, is we manufacture the consumable tests in the US. So there was a link to the US even before our recent endeavors.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue. First, thank you for that. And this is a good segue to think about, why are you interested in coming to the US, and specifically here to maybe New York?
So when you look at the global market for agriculture, you can see there's hotspots. One of them is China, the other one is India, the other one is the US. Europe is a very big hotspot, but Europe is also, while it is one free market, it is also many different countries which have different languages, different localizations. And so when we built the product in English, what we considered is, where will we be able to make the most impact? And while Asia is a very big target, it does require having, you have to modify what you're doing to be cost effective in those countries. And so there's a couple of factors. One of them is the fact that the Rochester is what drew us to the US, at least in most recent times. We work within optics, photonics, and imaging. And we were looking for support, because this kind of technology really requires expertise. Getting from 0 to 90% completion or 80% completion is usually not so hard, but going from that 80% to 100%, you really need the expertise. And so that's how we were drawn to Rochester. We were lucky enough to be selected for the Luminate program, which we're a part of right now. And when we originally went to Rochester for the selection, we quickly learned about what New York State is doing in terms of agriculture. I'm dancing around the topic that Cornell is a very big player in this, and so there was an interest there, and we were very lucky through NextCore to be connected to the Center of Excellence at Cornell, and quite quickly we were able to get included onto a project. And so we saw this to be the expertise in optics, photonics, and imaging up in Rochester, but also be able to leverage Cornell. And it has worked extremely well so far. So there's an attraction, technical, but also application level in New York State.
This is a great place for me to jump in. It's been a great conversation. I was hesitant to interrupt. We have a question or two that I'd like to make sure get to you from the audience, but I think you're doing a great job of bringing it around from the work you've been doing to build your business, and how Luminate and Rochester and the Grow New York region and Cornell and other things feature there. So the question, I'll read this to you. Is this a test like litmus paper test, where users are required to purchase new repeatedly, or is this a test where I buy a microscope and a few slices and I'm good to go forever? I can't quite read this right. I need more details to understand the basic discussion. So what kind of a business model question, of razor blades and razors question for you there?
Yeah, so this wasn't a decision that we made based on the business. It was a decision that actually came from a technological front. But yeah, to answer the question, it is very similar to the whole litmus paper concept. We were really attracted to the ease of use of the litmus paper, but we also wanted to have the best of the lab analysis as well. So where we see ourselves is we draw from the ease of use of the litmus paper, and then we add the instrument to give you the laboratory style analysis. So it is a razor blades. You will have to buy them once. It's a one-time use. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep, it's great. Microscope and slides. Jackie Spoon's off. That's great. I think that does answer the question. I hope it does for you there, Jackie. And so we just only have a few minutes remaining. Another question I had for you is, you alluded to it, everyone's living in it. You've got the COVID world. I know it's affecting your short-term plans. I'm just thinking more longer term about your business model and trying to build a global business, what other, how else do you anticipate the business climate over the next couple of years is going to affect your business? And what are your early plans to make sure your startup makes it through and thrives in the face of the virus and some of the limitations it's putting on the world?
I think we've been really good at adapting. And it's not just right now, but also through the life cycle of the company. We haven't had the benefit of being extremely well funded through venture capitalists or through private money, but we have been well supported through grants and public domain funding. And what that taught us is that you really need to be able to weather the storm. So the first thing that we did in order to mitigate any effect of this crisis was to look at our customers. We checked in with every single client that we could, who would answer the phone, and really tried to understand what the impact on their business is. That was the first step, because if they're impacted significantly, that's going to mean they're not going to be thinking about us. So that's what we did to figure out how badly were our clients affected by it. And what we heard was very interesting. None of the people that we, at least that we call here in the European region, were significantly impacted by COVID-19. What they saw is, and maybe it's the proximity thing, because most of the people are living in areas where you don't have that much of a congestion in terms of foot traffic or people. And so what they've said is that they've adopted, new methods of basically, they don't just sit in the same car anymore. Everyone drives to the same spot in the field. They meet there, they observe social distancing, and they're able to operate. There was some worry about fertilizer and other inputs actually getting to farms on time. But I think the corporates and their distributors have really stepped in to figure out how to make the logistics work. There is some worry about how it's going to look next year, because every plant, every facility has been operating at a lower capacity. And so while that didn't impact this year, because it's usually a season behind, we do expect something next year. However, this actually works in our favor, because if you're short on supply of, let's say, fertilizer, you're going to start wondering how you can use that more efficiently. And you're going to wonder how, and that's typically where soil analysis or leaf analysis come in. So we're quite positive on the fact that this might actually end up being a market driver for us, but it's still left to see how things play out over the course of this year.
That's great. Well, thank you. We've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank Jim Sonal from NextCore and Luminate program and other great things they do up there. I also want to thank you, Shang, for being the interviewer. You did a great job. And Keenan, really great to kind of get to meet you this way. I've heard of your exploits from afar, so it's very nice to meet you. I'm going to share this one slide here real quick and thank everyone who attended the webinar. Just remind folks, the Grow New York application is open through July 15th. If you know a startup, or if you are a startup that might want to win $1 million, check it out at grow-ny.com. And really encourage you to look at that, and hope you'll join us in subsequent weeks as we continue our Thursday lunch webinar series. And thank you for attending today.